Good evening, everybody. I'm Harris Miller. I'm one of the board members for the Norwood Park Historical Society. And then I also serve on the Long Range Planning Committee as well at the museum. So presentation tonight that I'm doing is biking through Morton Grove's history from Native American land and pioneer farming village to Chicago suburb. And then this is just more about me. So just briefly, I grew up in Morton Grove. Currently, I live in Evanston, but I do know that I have some genealogical ties, obviously, to the city of Chicago. I grew up, besides growing up in Morton Grove, I went to Parkview School and Niles West High School in Morton Grove and Skokie, and then I went to Lake Forest College and graduated with the class of 2015 with a bachelor's of arts in history. I also am the secretary of the Morton Grove Historical Society, and I serve on a group called the Northeast Illinois Historic Commission. So I'm also their secretary. And finally, I'm involved in my synagogue. I'm active as a board member, and I help run their strategic planning committee as a member. And we have a social action and inclusion committee where I'm active in. And then I do run a blog also called goexplorechicagoland.com. So feel free to check that out, like that on Facebook, follow it on Instagram. They had pictures from about 5 years ago, just me in Lincoln Park on a bike ride. So about the Morton Grove Historical Society, it's a little set back on Dempster Street. I want to say maybe 3 blocks west of Austin Avenue. So it originally began under the Village Senior Citizen Organization back in 1970. Their first meeting was actually held at the old fire station in 1976 on Kelly and Lincoln Avenue. Prior to its permanent home, the society for a while was actually in Morton Grove's Village Hall on Capulina Avenue. That's where the Morton Grove Chamber of Commerce is today. Okay, and then just more about the museum. So the Help Yale family, they donated their home to the society in 1984. However, we did a renovation, and then it opened in 1986 at Hard Park next to the Civic Center, where it is today. As you can tell, it's a beautiful farmhouse. The building, that bottom right picture, that's the annex that we built back in 2008. The house itself was built in 1888 by the Help Yale family, an early family of Morton Grove. There were 3 generations who lived in this house. Dorothy Yale was the last one, from our understanding, who lived there until the very end of it being a private residence in 1984. And then again, it got moved, of course, to Hard Park in 86. And then here's a flyer that I found online. They're not easy to find, but I found a flyer of the society when the house got dedicated officially as a museum back in 1986 when it actually opened. So as you know, we're going to talk more about this bike map that we created for the Morton Grove community back in about 2015. But why did they create this bike map in the first place? It was to visit our museum and offer a great learning experience, of course, to people in the community, people who love history. great way to get out, and explore the community, especially in the warm months. Um, and then with a map of all the local sites, community members and visitors are encouraged, of course, to explore the history of Morton Grove, um, obviously beyond the walls of our museum. Um, then how were the sites chosen? So there, we're actually going to be working on it, expanding um, our map at some point, but currently there are about 20 sites, and ultimately the map features a combination of well-known local sites of historic prominence in the village, and then there's some lesser known ones that many have not heard of. And then we also have a lot of new residents I know who moved to the Morton Grove area. So this is a great opportunity for them to learn about where they're living now. Um, and then just briefly, there's some examples on the right hand side just of the former Sunny airfield. That's now where Howard Park is, and then it extended over to Mead and Lake Street. There was a baseball diamond, believe it or not, um, around Churchill Street between Nashville and Natoma in Morton Grove. That's now part of Wayside Woods. You could kind of make it out on an aerial today. And then there's a former Nickelodeon theater, which I'll show a picture of a little later. Um, and that was on Capulina Avenue. It's a brick building, dates to maybe the 1910s or so, but today it'd be really difficult to tell that it was a theater. Apparently, Charlie Chaplin and a couple other famous folks were there, but the main one we know about is Charlie Chaplin. Was actually ran by the Husher family, a local family in Morton Grove at the time. So we did a partnership with Edgebrook Cycle when our former curator was in charge. So the letter's right there, just about us doing the partnership. In Edgebrook Cycle, they've been obviously in Edgebrook for over 30 years, and they agreed to sponsor our map, and that was extremely nice of them to do. Hopefully, we could work with them in the future again. And just some more about just the map. So they basically used a Google map and a physical map to locate where all the sites are, all the historic sites are. And the bike map route was mapped out and its total distance was determined. We used a graphic designer. Her name was Denise Worrell, to create the final design, which was printed. And there's an example on your right hand side of the screen. And then we also did get an award, by the way, from the Illinois Association of Museums, or IAM. The award's on your right from 2015. And we were, of course, honored to get that in 2015. It would be really nice if we could get it again, of course. And then they did a tour, by the way, in 2015 when this map was officially launched to the public and to the museum members. It launched the same day actually as one of our exhibits called History of Recreation and Leisure in Morton Grove. So what a coincidence. They did feature at the time a 19th century penny farthing bicycle that was once owned by Morton Grove resident Art Lausch. Obviously a nod to cycling in the Morton Grove community and even the surrounding areas. So, and most of these people, I would say, were, I don't recall attending this, but most people that went were either very avid with bicycling, and then you had a lot of amateurs and a lot of families who went along on the tour. So it was a nice group of people, as you could see. Okay, and then for those who are not from the area, Morton Grove, as you can see from this Google map, is located roughly between Gulf Road on the north, Oakton Street on the south, on the east by the Edens Expressway, jogging slightly over by Grosse Point Road, and then on the west, it kind of it's a little jagged, but it goes over to Washington Road, near Gulf, and then down to about Dempster. And then there's some quick facts there on your right, but I'm going to get more into that in the presentation, but just for your reading. But briefly though, the population is currently around 23,519. The size is about 5.09 square miles, to be precise. It was mostly an English settlement in the 1830s, just like Norwood Park was. And then Germans, Prussians, and Luxembourgers came in the 1840s, just like the general Chicago area. Most of them farmed and owned truck farms, greenhouses, and local businesses. And then one business that I remember and would be Jamaican Gardens, or back in the day it was called Platts and Sons on Lincoln Avenue and Central Avenue near the Edens. That dated actually in 1904. And then we are near the Milwaukee North Line for the Metro. And then you could take a CTA bus, a PACE bus. And then we have the CTA Yellow Line at Dempster Skokie, about a mile east of the village. Okay, and then so I did a history of the earliest residents of Morton Grove, who obviously were Native Americans. So in the early days, we had people who were the Paleo Indians, and they were mostly of the hunter-gathering cultures. They lived in Illinois, so that was 12,000 to 8,000 BCE. As you keep going down that timeline, you have the Archaic Indians from 8,000 to 1,000 BCE. They became a bit more advanced, obviously, during that era. And then during 1000 BCE to 1000 CE, you had the woodland Indian cultures, and they, in the general theme here, continued to advance. So they did more agriculture, weapons, social structures, and intertribal trade. And then there were Mississippian Indians who came a bit later, 900 to 1450 CE. They mostly lived in southeastern Illinois, but I felt that there was something to include here. But then come 1600 or so, the the Eliwek were a major tribe in the area, and their confederation dominated the future state by the mid 1600s. And then pre-1830s, Illinois was dominated by the Potawatomi and Miami Native Americans. And from my understanding and from other folks I've talked with, they were known mostly for quilt work, beadwork, and embroidery. They traded with tribes in Illinois and even farther away from here. And then things obviously began to change come 1673 and even prior to that as well. When Frenchmen Pierre Jacques Marquette and Louis Joliet visited the future state of Illinois. So just I got additional dates here just for your reference. So in 1717, Illinois became a part of the French colony of Louisiana. The Fort Charters became the military and civil government of Illinois in 1719. And then obviously we had the French and Indian War excuse me, 1754 to 1763, the First Treaty of Paris was then signed at the end of the war. And then 1775, you had the American Revolution. A second Treaty of Paris was signed in 1783. 1778, George Rogers Clark led a campaign against the British for the land they were on. The state of Virginia then assumed control on July 4th of that year. In 1795, the Treaty of Greenville was signed, and that established the Indian Territory borders that also allow the U.S. government to build forts in the Northwest Territory. That was established by the Northwest Ordinance in 1787. By 1803, the Caucasia Indians signed Treaty at Vincennes, relinquishing land in Illinois set near Caucasia. U.S. troops would build and occupy Fort Dearborn on the future site of Chicago as we know today. And then just a few other important points here about the Native Americans. The Sauk and the Fox tribes would sign the Treaty of St. Louis. They ceded land between the Illinois and Mississippi rivers to the U.S. government, and that was prior to 1809. And then the state's territory was created a little after that signing in March of 1809. Come 1811, the Battle of Tippecanoe. Now, this is a key point here. Tecumseh, he was a Shawnee Indian chief. He attempted to unite the Native Americans in a rebellion against U.S. policies. Unfortunately, they did lose that battle. And then June 18th of 1812, as you know, was the War of 1812, when the U.S. declared war on Britain and also the Native allies for trade rights and territorial control. And then, as you know, there was a massacre at Fort Dearborn, where Native Americans attacked soldiers and other people who were stationed trying to leave the fort. 52 did get killed in that. There was the Treaty of Ghent, signed in 1814, and then Fort Dearborn was rebuilt in 1816. So Illinois then became a state on December 3rd, 1818. And then there was a treaty by the Kickapoo in 1819, just a little after the statehood was completed. And then a couple important treaties here. I've heard Dan Malone and other folks talk about these. So the first Treaty of Prairie du Chien, August 19th, 1825, was signed by representatives of several tribes, establishing tribal boundaries to reduce intertribal conflicts. And then come 1827, the Winnebago Indians ceded land to the government after a 6-month uprising. And then there are more changes coming. So the second Treaty of Prairie du Chien is signed on July 29th, 1829 by the Potawatomi, the Ottawa, and Chippewa, ceding 3,000 square miles of northern Illinois territory. Now, the Winnebago or the Ho-Chunk would sign a separate treaty on August 1st of that year. And then we would have the Black Hawk War, of course, a big deal in this area. So May 14th, 1832 was when that started. There was an Indian rebellion led by Sauk leader Black Hawk. The first battle was Stillman's Run on in May 14th, 1832. That's where the first battle was. And then the war ended on August 27th with a surrender by Black Hawk. So September 13th, there was a treaty signed at Fort Armstrong where the Sauk resistors and their allies would cede land to Illinois. Wisconsin, Iowa, and be forced to move to reservations, unfortunately, in the West. And then come September 26th, 1833, the Treaty of Chicago. Now, a lot of us locals know more about this. It was the last Indian treaty in Illinois that was signed. The Potawatomi, Ottawa, and Chippewa agreed to leave the state. The treaty boundary ran diagonal on present-day Rogers Avenue and Forest Preserve Drive. That's just that's basically part of Rogers Park today, and then the Dunning neighborhood and a couple other neighborhoods within the city of Chicago. And then 1838, just a couple more facts here. There was the Potawatomi Trail of Death, which did go through central Illinois. 1,000 people were forced to march, of course, west. 40 would die en route. And then in the winter, going into 1839, there was the Cherokee Trail of Tears that many of us know about. And there were more than 10,000 of them who were forcibly marched through southern Illinois, with thousands dying en route. And then just another point from 1833 going in, and then that was basically through 1840. There was land that was bought, believe it or not, by the U.S. government from the natives at only 6 cents an acre. That's peanuts to me. But then the white settlers bought it from the government at $1.25 an acre in 1840. Okay, and then there were several early settlers. I chose to include a couple from Chicago as well. So obviously you had John Baptiste Point du Sable, who settled near the Chicago River South Branch in 1779, where he had a trading post. And then obviously Fort Dearborn, completed in 1804. And then John Kinsey and a few other settlers settled in that area in the vicinity. And then now we're getting more into Morton Grove here. So by 1830, and this also applies to Norwood Park and the surrounding area, they needed land for agriculture, the new settlers, and a lot of the area was very rocky, so they tried to find good quality soil. So in 1831, John Curtis was Morton Grove's first white settler, as we've been told. He lived off of present-day Church Street. And then I threw in 1832, Mark Noble, who settled in present-day Norwood Park, as a lot of us know. Now the Noble Seymour Crippen House. And it's very possible that he knew people from Morton Grove, like Sylvester Beckwith, who you see at the bottom there. He came in 1833, also from England. And there's a good chance that they knew Chief Alexander Robinson and his family. And then Billy Caldwell, who was also called Chief Sauganash. And then just a couple other early settlers. You had William White, Thomas Weldon, John Dews, and his parents. They settled west of the Chicago River, which is now Morton Grove and Gulf, Illinois today. So near Gulf Road and I want to say Overlook Drive. There's actually a cemetery off of Gulf Road that's called Dews Cemetery, and they're buried there, believe it or not. There was somebody, and I thought that was an interesting fact. There was someone named Thomas Jefferson who was a settler near Church Street too, but no relation to the third president. I thought you would get a kick out of that. So Sylvester Beckwith, he then sold his land in the 1840s to the Hoffman family. They're still in the village today, actually, the Hoffmans. I actually grew up near one of the Hoffman relatives on Mangle Avenue and Madison Street in Morton Grove. So, yeah, I had a chance to get to know them. I know one of the other relatives. She's the corporation counsel for the village of Morton Grove. I haven't talked to her in ages, but hopefully I could get reconnected with her at some point. And then they sold the land in 1970. But as of the book that is one of my sources, they still owned some of the property in that time, about 1970 or so. Um, the land in the 1830s and 1840s, or area rather, was pretty isolating, as you would imagine. You had the Native American trails, but they were very uh, rough, rugged, very muddy, as you would imagine. As I mentioned before, 1840s, there were more settlers that came from Germany and Prussia. Um, and then they cleared the land, and that labor was very backbreaking, as you would imagine, to clear all that land. Um, and then the wood that they took was all hauled to Dutchman's Point, which is Niles today, and it was sold for $4 a cord. So roughly where Tooele, Milwaukee, and Waukegan meet today, that kind of weird diagonal intersection by the police station and the Holiday Inn Express. There were a few other families in Morton Grove that settled: Lochner's, the Hoosiers, Hope Yales, Meyer, Hoffman, Dilg, Theobalds, and Gables. Um, they all farmed the land, as Morton Grove was a very rural community back then. Um, they raised animals, they trucked vegetables and fruit to market, I understand, down to Chicago and probably the surrounding towns or settlements even back then. Um, Another important figure would have been Samuel E. Ferris. He came in 1841 to Morton Grove. He bought 80 acres near Church and Narragansett, presently today, and at that time was $98.85. There was a bachelor squatter who actually lived in that area named O'Brien. We don't know too much about him, but he had a log cabin apparently. Um, and then there was Carl Husher, as I mentioned, the Husher family. They came in 1842. They settled near Waukegan and Dempster. Okay, I got muted somehow, but I'm back. It looks like so. Matthias Hoffman settled near present day Gulf School in 1842, somewhere off of Waukegan Road near Gulf Road, maybe even near Beckwith. Um, and then there's the Peter Help family, which obviously the Help Yale House is named after. They settled about, let's say, 35 years prior to that house being built on Lincoln and McVicker. In 1888, they settled at Waukegan and Emerson in 1842. And then a year later, the Finks, they settled at Waukegan Road and Dempster Street on the northwest corner. And then there's the Gable and Lochner family who settled in 1844 and bought 160 acres of land together east of Waukegan Road, north of Dempster, at $7.50 an acre, but was divided in two in 1845. Finally, John Doe and the Kohler family settled on Waukegan Road in 1854. Hang on just a moment. Hang on just a moment. Looks like the computer may have, I don't know if it froze. Let's see what's going on here. Okay, it looks like it's working, but it's kind of on the slow side for some reason. So, um, February 6th of 1841, there was someone named Elon Crane, who settled with family and son-in-law John Miller, who purchased 80 acres on the Chicago River south of Dempster Street on on Miller's Mill Road. No relation to me. He erected a water-powered sawmill, John Miller, which provided sawed boards for construction purposes. Miller's Mill Road was obviously named after John Miller, and it was cut through the wilderness to Skokie, which was at one time Niles Center. Oxen hauled timber to the mill on this rough road, to saw wood into boards for construction. This was the only road that linked the future Morton Grove village settlement at the time to the city of Chicago. It took 4 days to travel on a wagon trail on so-called good days, and double on so-called bad days from Chicago and to present-day Northfield, apparently. Probably a little less to Morton Grove since we're a little south of there. And then the Northwest Plank Road, still very important to Morton Grove, was built in 1849 to 1850 as a toll road, now Milwaukee Avenue. And then a little later, 1858, Henry Harms, the great man of Niles Township, as they call him in Skokie, constructed a toll road from Lincoln Avenue, so starting in the Lakeview Lincoln Park neighborhood, to Niles Center, which is now Skokie, and it got connected to Miller's Mill Road. There was a one-way journey through 3 toll roads that Harms had for 15 cents per wagon. Miller's Mill Road was renamed Lincoln Avenue, as you know it today. There's some signs for Miller's Mill Road that they're honorary. May 11th, 1915, by the Morton Grove Village Board. However, Harms Road still bears its settler name, believe it or not. And then Amos Snell, and the Higgins family. You hear a lot about them, I know, in Norwood Park and Niles, even Morton Grove. They bought land apparently from John Miller. So Snell, he cleared the land and logs were hauled to Jefferson Park, where they were sold to the Northwestern Railroad, or the Chicago Northwestern, as fuel for the wood burning locomotives. He then sold the land to Frederick Kohler, that's someone well known in Morton Grove, for $25 an acre. He sold charcoal in the city for 3 cents a bushel and additional wood for $4 a cord. The land was sold, so this is the land in Morton Grove. The original subdivision sits on for $5.75 an acre in 1891 to subdividers Fred A. Bingham and George E. Furnow. They created 177 lots for the first subdivision. Each lot sold for $150. Morton Grove homes typically were pretty set back. They're still kind of like that today, especially the older homes. They allowed at the time chicken coops, cow sheds, and horse barns, and they used the land to cultivate vegetables, and I'm sure also fruit and herbs. And then later on, they would also use the land for greenhouses and such, for roses and you name it. One second while I change the slide here. Just hang tight for a moment. I'm trying to figure out what's going on. So it's just a little slow again.
So here, as we see your cursor moving, can you hit the page down button?
I'm trying to. Oh, okay. Hey, Art. I'm trying to do that, but it seems like it's a little frozen at the moment.
Okay, why don't you unshare and reshare your screen?
Okay, let's do that. Yeah, my apologies here. There's it's just being a little slow for some reason. Thank you for bearing with me, everybody that's listening. I hope you're enjoying the conversation. I mean, the discussion. Okay, I'm just trying to open the slide back up.
Oh,
Yeah, just bear with me a moment. Yeah, it seems like yeah, that's kind of strange. So it seems like my presentation itself is frozen, but I could show the presentation in open office.
sure, whatever.
Okay. Yeah, again, my apologies. I don't know what's going on. So hang on 1 second. I gotta start my task manager for those of you still listening. And then I'm gonna get back up and running here in just a moment. Okay. Okay, I still have you guys up. Hang on a moment. Okay. Thank you for bearing with me. I'm almost ready to show you again my presentation. Just having some technical difficulties here. Let me just make sure I'm on the right slide for you all. Okay. Okay, great. Okay, I'm going to start sharing again, Art.
Yes, please.
Okay, thank you. Okay, here we go. Okay, I hope everyone could see this.
Sure, that's
Okay,
fine.
great. All right, so thank you again for bearing with me tonight. Um, so this is the Chicago, Milwaukee, and St. Paul Railroad, as most of you know, goes through Morton Grove. The pictures that you see, I got from the web. A couple were from the Morton Grove Historical Society. So the railroad arrived in 1872 as a single track, but then they expanded in 1892 because of the anticipation of the World's Columbian Exposition. Um, there were local businesses and factories that sprang up in the 1880s. The most notable was the Globe Pickle Company, Squire Dingy, Henning Pickle Company, and Pullman Brothers Company. That was the largest rose greenhouse grower in the U.S., and it won first prize at the 1904 St. Louis World's Fair. Um, and as you can see, some of the pictures on the very bottom, I think that one in the middle might date to the I gotta say the 1940s or 50s. The one on the right is a pretty early one of a steam engine. And then the remaining ones, upper right is from 1971. The two on the left date to 1973. That's the old train station there in that bottom left photo. That got demolished in 1976 to make way for the present one that stands today. Okay, and I did a timeline, which we have on our Morton Grove Historical Society website. We already talked about the pioneers and the Native Americans, but just some quick facts here. There was the Little Red Schoolhouse, which got torn down. That was on Waukegan, Beckwith, until I want to say about 1986 or so. And then we know about the railroad, of course, which is today the Metro. It was, and then we did get our post office in 1874. The village was founded in 1895. A couple years prior was the subdividing by Bingham and Fernald. We got our first police department that same year. They had a village marshal. 1897, the first village school was built. That would be on Capulina, and believe it or not, that's our village hall today, and you'll get a picture of that later on. 1899, we got our first telephones in Morton Grove. Okay. And then this is the timeline part from 1921 to 1989. As you can see on the right-hand side, that's the Doughboy on Lincoln Avenue. You'll see a couple more pictures later in my presentation. It was unveiled by the Women's War Working Circle as a tribute to Morton Grove men who fought in World War I. The festival organized for the event became the first of what we know today as Morton Grove Days. And then just a couple other facts here. So in 1931, that's actually when we started buying water from the city of Chicago. A lot of people always wonder when that started. 1938 was when our library, not when it was built, but when it was founded. There's a little error there that we need to go back and correct. In 1951, the Park District is established, which includes Harp Park, and that's named for Morton Grove's first mayor, George Harp. That becomes our first park. Even though I would argue that the Morton Grove Public Park on Lincoln Avenue, where the Doughboy is, would have been our first park. I'm sure people will have a nice debate about that. 1957, there was a synagogue that once was in Morton Grove called Northwest Suburban Jewish Congregation. They formed with 20 families that met at the Peel residence and later rented a storefront on Lincoln Avenue. In 1961, they broke ground for that synagogue on Lyons. And that's on the northwest corner of Morton Grove near Washington Street. That synagogue opened and was dedicated in 1962. The sanctuary was added in 1974. Unfortunately, they closed in 2007 because of declining membership. The religious aspects of the congregation were donated to Congregation Beth Shalom in Northbrook off of Landwehr. A number of the remaining congregants, I believe, are still members there today. And then a number also came to Beth Hillel, now Congregation B'nai Emunah, which I'm a member of. And we moved over there in about 2000. And we've been members for 20 years. So then that's what happened with that congregation. So then jumping to 1970, the Morton Grove Historical Society is formed. And then the original Pequods, we'll get to that a little later, opens in 1970 on Fernald. 1976 is when the society's truly founded. They have a meeting in the old fire station and later Village Hall. And then 1981, there's the gun ban, which I know everybody knows about. It got repealed though in 2008. And then the Yale House, which is now our museum, was moved to Harvard Park from its original site on Lincoln and McVicker. The family again donated it to us. 1986, the Morton Grove Historical Museum officially opens after a restoration of the house. And then 89, we'll get to that too. He opens Bert's Place on Ferris Avenue. And it was also called Starbats a little prior to that too. You'll see a couple pictures of that. And just one more note, that building that you see in the bottom right, that's actually the Morton Grove Public Library. And that was built in 1952. So that's where where that original park was, that I would argue was original to the village. Okay. And then this is more modern, 89 to about 2019. So in 1990, the Morton Grove Muslim Community Center and Education Center opened. And then they did purchase the former Borg School from District 70 in the early 2000s. They built a mosque on Theobald Avenue near Menard. And they have a school which is in the former Borg School, and it's very active today. And then 1995, our centennial came through, so 100 years at that point. The annex, as I mentioned, was built in 2008, called the John and Mary Helen Slater Education Annex. That eagle dancer that you see on the right-hand side where my cursor is, that was created in 2013. I wish I could tell you who the person was that designed it, but if I find out who it is, I'll let you all know. 2017, the Doughboy Monument, so that's on Lincoln Avenue by the library, was restored and rededicated. And then we purchased water from the city of Evanston starting in 2019. Prior to that, Morton Grove and Skokie underwent a huge construction project where they built a water main basically down Greenwood Avenue in McCormick from about Church Street in Evanston. So that's where the hookup is, just east of the North Shore Channel. And then just a little more about the 1895 founding of Morton Grove. So as you know, we were founded on December 24th, 1895. There was a small group of people who met though about 2 months prior at a print shop, which was part of A.F. Henning's old people's home, which unfortunately did not really get off the ground, but the print shop was there. It was managed by John Gruber, which was built in 1894. And then George Hart became our mayor as soon as we were founded on Christmas Eve of 1895. And then Morton Grove would continue to grow going into the 1920s before the Great Depression, and then obviously the war, and then we would continue to grow after that post-World War II. Nightlife was a big thing in Morton Grove back in the day as well, and we'll get into that in a little bit as well. And we surprisingly had a number of model homes in the village. I could probably point out a couple of them, and that's something that I never knew as someone growing up there till more recently. So so imagine going on a bike ride. I know we got 18 inches of snow out there right now in Evanston, and probably a 16 in Norwood Park, and about 18 in Morton Grove. Um, so pre 1920, look on that right hand side there. Um, this is the original subdivision that I had told you about prior. Um, there are a number of homes that are already constructed. This is about maybe 1905 or so. Um, this was taken by William Washington Sonny. He's one of our related to one of the early residents. Um, I'm going to try to read this here. So it was taken from the top of the three-story Dilg building, which was built in 1904, by the northwest corner of Lincoln and Ferris Avenues. That's Jerusalem Lutheran, where my cursor is, on the far left, with houses along Cali Avenue in the foreground. That's Cali right there. And then I'd imagine that's Georgiana, a little further back, but then that's Fernald, where the church is, and then those other homes are there. And then obviously it's all still very wooded the further east you go, because we're only still with the early subdivision in 1905 here, 10 years after the founding. To the left, you have a couple of the early homes here on Ferris Avenue, just right down the street from Burt's. I know you're probably excited about that. There are a couple early homes there. And then this is an early farmhouse from Morton Grove that dates to about 1868, I want to say, near Lincoln Avenue in Maine. And it's likely the oldest standing home left in Morton Grove. We had an 1840s home that was near the metro station. It was a farmhouse, and unfortunately, it got demolished to make way for the homestead. The family didn't want to they wanted to part ways, but they didn't want to donate the home, from my understanding, to the historical society. And then the Hoffman family farmhouse that I mentioned earlier, that too got demolished a few years ago, and then the land was vacant, and then now there's a McMansion on that property on Beckwith, believe it or not. So thought I'd throw that in there for you. We have a couple coach houses, believe it or not, in Morton Grove. Some people call them accessory dwelling units. If you're in the city of Chicago or in Evanston, that's what they call them here. There's maybe, I'm just thinking here out loud, there may be 2 or 3 other existing coach houses left in Morton Grove. This one's off of Capulina near Ferris. You can kind of see the stonework that is present. It's all painted over. There must have been, these are modern doors, but there must have been some type of way to get in for the horses, another type of door that you would pull open by hand. Thought that would be interesting to show you if you want to bike through the alleys or walk through the alleys in Morton Grove. Now we get to 1920s housing. So you have the Sears homes, and there's a couple examples on Cali Avenue from the early 20th century. I know Norwood Park has a few as I've driven around the area. So these are a handful that are still on Cali Avenue. I believe most of them are still standing. I think there might have even been a couple torn down, but those are still standing. Let's see. And then just above, there are a couple other bungalows. that's on Mansfield though. So this is outside the original subdivision at this point. Um, that see that picture where my cursor is? That's the basement of one of the homes, and that actually was a speakeasy at one time during Prohibition. Believe it or not, that's what accounts we have from people that lived in the area at the time, and even the current homeowners. They did some digging into learning the history. Um, and then this is a well-known home. This is the Mayor Herbert Dilg House. It was built in 1925. It was customized. Um, and he served the village as mayor from 1925 to 26 and 1931 to 34. Um, he was part of the Republican National Convention as an alternative delegate from 1935 to 1942. And then in the 1940s, he was a businessman too. So he opened the Morton Grove Garage on Lincoln Avenue, where he sold Studebakers. If you're a car person, thought that I'd throw that in there for you. In 1946, he did sell this house, and then going into the future, um, the home was owned by returning soldiers and single mothers post World War II. Okay, and then now we're going into the 1950s and post World War II. So obviously there was very little growth during the Great Depression, and then during the war too, with housing, it basically came to a halt for that time. But there were sidewalks from the 20s that were laid out and ready to go, but there was no building being done at that time. And then now we're in the 50s. So there were homes built, and these are just some examples and some of the developers. I actually lived with my family in one of those tract homes on Mango Avenue, Madison, and that is actually a couple blocks from Niles West High School. That tract home, from my understanding, was built in 1953. I think most of those homes were built in the 40s and then into the 50s as well. And they were built mostly for returning GIs who came back from the war. They had to have a place to live. It was basically a starting home for them. And then looking up toward the top right where my cursor is. Now, these homes, you still see them today too, but they're more on the west side of Morton Grove, off of Sayre in near National Park. My grandma lived in one of those homes for about 27 years, 1986 to 2013. Her home was built in 1956, from my understanding. It got remodeled and a lot got redone by the current owners, but it's out of the family now. But then there were homes like this too built on the east side of town, so closer to Parkview School and in the vicinity. And then I know that those pictures are a little hard to see, but down at the bottom, these tri-level homes, as well as a couple single level, those were built in the 50s as well, and maybe even the late 40s. In the east side of Morton Grove, kind of where I grew up a little later on. And those homes are mostly still standing today. And then you had these bi-levels. A lot of those are just in the general vicinity of Austin Park. That's where a lot of these are located still. And then there are bi-levels throughout, but nothing this unique, really. until you get to that area by the park. If you keep cycling through the village, you'll find homes just like this, as I mentioned, very a little different style. They're more in the northeast corner of Morton Grove near Parkview School. And then these homes, they're pretty scattered throughout the village. There are some in northeastern Morton Grove, and then you got some on the west side of the village too, kind of near where the Hoffman family used to live. They're still standing to this day. Now, a big boom besides these homes being built was the Edens Expressway, built in 1951 from about Cicero Avenue to Lake Cook Road. And that's basically how people got around. That's how the village started growing. It was a boon, you could say, to the village and even to the neighboring suburbs like Skokie, which is on this side where my cursor is. That side is Morton Grove. All right, and then on to the next part. I thought this would be cool to show you. So this is from the 60s. This is of Morton Grove. That's the Dilg building back there. I'll show you another picture in a couple minutes. We had a pure oil gas station at Lincoln Avenue and Cali. There's a fire station there today in this location, the current fire station. This was a bank building, and that's where the Studebakers used to be sold by the Dilg, by Herbert Dilg, where my cursor is. I believe this site was mostly, I know Baxter was over here, but I think it might have been empty land, and maybe there was a park there for a while that was owned by Baxter for the workers. And obviously, I thought this was important. So the gun ban in 1981, it went into effect toward the end of that year. Was to go into effect, but there were lawsuits rather. It was introduced in 1980, though, as an ordinance. The district court, though, did uphold the ban, but it did go into effect February 1st of 1982. There were a handful of guns apparently that were given to the village when it went into effect. 3 of them apparently were already useless. They were rusty. And then there were later court decisions repealing the ban, the handgun ban in 2008. And I'm sure a lot of you remember that as well. 1987, so the Kennedy family had a little appearance in that era. Caroline Kennedy visited Morton Grove on around August 12th of 1987. It appeared in the Sun-Times, looks like until about 1992. Says on the reverse side of this photo are a number of stamps, markings, and notes that indicated the picture was taken on August 12th, 1987, and used several times until 1992 by the Sun-Times. The handwritten note in blue pencil said, as quote, "She was in town interviewing folks for a book." The clipping taped to the back from the Sun-Times is attributed to photographer Kathleen Reeve and stated, as quoted, "Caroline Kennedy pauses outside during a visit to the Morton Grove Village Hall Wednesday." So that would be around August. So that would be Wednesday, August 12th of 87 or so, or very close to that. All right. So this is the first Morton Grove Exchange building. So we're back on doing the tour here. So John Kohler, he operated the Morton Grove Exchange at the northwest corner of Lincoln and Ferris. during that time. It may have been as early as the 1870s for all we know, because the building looks pretty, uh, I think it predates the Bingham and Fernald era, to be honest. And people at the Historical Society aren't exactly sure when it was built, but we think 1870s maybe. It was later moved to where it stands today, as you see in this picture, to the corner of Ferris and Capulina. I think this building was built probably a little later. And then these are, but they're all pretty early homes, but this one was built, my guess is slightly later. You could barely see that Nickelodeon building right there, but we'll get to it in a few minutes. Now the Dilg building, um, as you could see, this is basically a second generation. The Kohler Exchange is still standing, which is the original frame building, but this is where they later moved in 1904. Despite objections from family members who operate a tavern and several stores nearby, or in a general store nearby, rather, Fred Dill expanded his Morton Grove Exchange to include a general store, tavern, and post office. That's when he constructed this building, which you could see is about perhaps 3.5 stories at Lincoln and Ferris Avenues. He died in 1909 at the age of 46. So this is Mr. Fred Dilg. Some blamed his death on the stress caused by a rapidly growing business, which I could see, back in that era. And that picture to the bottom left is a Miller's Mill Road. The name would change again in 1915 from Miller's Mill to Lincoln Avenue. And it was very barren back then. You could see the Pullman greenhouses there on the right-hand side, which would then later become vacant land during the Great Depression. And that's the railroad right there, believe it or not, the two tracks. A little hard to see there in that picture. Okay, so we're almost at Burt's, but first gotta talk about Pequod's and bring her in. So Pequod's, which is this building here on Fernald, this is their original location. It was previously the site of the Golden Dinner Bell restaurant and Phillips Candy Store and Chocolate Shop. It was opened in 1971 by Burt Katz and has been a Morton Grove staple ever since. Named for the whaling ship in Moby Dick, as you probably recall the logo. It was sold by him, the current owner of Burt's Place at the time of the map being published, in 1986. Soon afterwards, the new owners expanded to a second location in Lincoln Park. That's on Clybourne and Webster. Yeah, Webster and Clybourne, roughly. And then the bringer in, as you could see, this was the a florist shop beforehand, the Haas Florist Exchange, and the Haupt, that's the Haupt family, Haupt Butcher Shop. And then that was dating back to the late 1800s. And then the Bringer Inn opened in 1933 at that site. So it has quite a long history being there. It's the oldest bar, I believe, that continues in Morton Grove. I think they opened just after Prohibition ended. I'm pretty certain that's the case. And I think it's either the first, it might even still be the original family that owns it. I can't be 100% certain. Next, so let's see, we are at Bert's place in the antique radio museum as quoted. Um, I wish we had pictures of the radios, but unfortunately, um, there aren't any photos of the actual radios out there. I know. I wish. But anyway, just to clarify one thing, the Bert's Place, which is the restaurant today, that was built in 1912. There's been, I think, a little confusion. Some people think that was the blacksmith shop, but that wasn't the case. Um, the blacksmith shop was actually um, where my cursor is on the left, and that was at the same or similar address. In the late 1800s, it was ran by Charles Pesk and son George, and that's them with their horse and where the blacksmith shop would have been in this building. Um, let's see real quick here. So besides blacksmithing, he provided essential services to local farmers and industry by crafting specialized tools and repairing anything made of metal. Horseshoeing was only one part of his work. Charles Pesk also served as one of Morton Grove's first police marshals and helped organize Morton Grove's volunteer fire department. The houses in the background, a little hard to see there, are on Kelly Avenue. This house is on Ferris. Um, just a quick rundown. Now I'll get more into Bert's place. So, Bert Katz, he set out. He had a Toyo Pet uh, vehicle, basically a predecessor to today's Toyota vehicles. They bought from Japan, and then they drove it throughout Asia and I think the Middle East as well. I've heard of like Iran and Afghanistan. So he was quite an explorer. It was him and his wife Sharon who did it. Um, anyway, so Bert's, he was once known as he once owned his first pizza restaurant, believe it or not, was in Evanston on Central Street near the CTA Purple Line, from my understanding. Um, at the time, the North South L. Um, and that was back in 1963. And then he opened Gulliver's in 1965 on Howard Street, just across from Evanston in the West Rogers Park, West Ridge neighborhood. And that restaurant is still there today. They have different owners, and they have a location in Oak Brook that is still going to. So back to Bert's place. So that opened a little later. It had to have been. It was in the 80s, obviously 1989, to be precise. He made the pizza unique in a pan, just like at Pequod's, with that caramelized crust. You're probably getting hungry by hearing that. And actually, at one time, it was called Emily's Place, where the 1912 building is, and they used that building for that. Tavern was run by Emily Bringer before he relocated it to the corner and opened the Bringer Inn. And I believe this had dated, it may have even dated to 1912 for all we know, but that's when it was called Emily's Place. But Bringer Inn opened in 1933. Okay, so the radios. There is this quote here from the Tribune. There were folks apparently who were interested in buying and selling radios, as you see here. So I thought that was pretty interesting. He stapled several of them, including tabletop radios, microphones, ham radios, and the QSL postcards of people's ham radio call letters to the ceiling beams. So he then sold his restaurant in 2015 to Jerry Petro and John Mano, passed away in April 2016. They reopened on March 3rd of 2017, keeping his recipes and traditions alive. Okay. So Morton Grove Roadhouses, we had several of those in Morton Grove. So as you know, the Eighth Amendment was ratified in 1919, went into effect in 1920. Prohibition was from 1920 to 1933, roughly. The roadhouses were very popular in rural areas, especially those with less adequate law enforcement, like Morton Grove. We had a police department, but yeah, it wasn't very. I guess the police department was not very well enforcing of the restrictions like they would be today. And then obviously there was no man's land in Wilmette, so people would go there as well. So on the map you had all these different taverns. I have a couple highlights. So Lincoln Tavern was off of I want to say School Street. There are a number of trees that are still standing from that era. People would drive from Chicago, Evanston, Lake Forest, and the North Shore to drink, party, and listen to concerts. Because places such as Evanston, even after Prohibition, had blue laws until the early 1980s, keeping their city dry. And I believe even Highland Park still was a dry town even into the 70s. Okay, and then there were these gangs, as you know, Al Capone's Chicago Mob and Roger Toohey's gang. They controlled many of these roadhouses, and they distributed the illicit booze. We were basically the crossroads between the two rival gangs. And that advertisement's from 1925 of the Lincoln Tavern, right there on your right. So if you have a chance, go check out those trees that I mentioned. They're very old trees. They got to be at least 300 to 500 years old. Just off School Street in Morton Grove in Dempster. Very well worth it going to see those. Okay, and now this is the Dells, another highlight. And then you had Club Red and Devious. I found a picture of it. They had Guy Lombardo perform there in 1933. So I thought that was pretty cool to share with those listening tonight. And Club Red and Devious is pretty well known. That was further down in Morton Grove, closer to Marmora, roughly, in Dempster. And then you had the Walton Club. I don't know as much about that, but that was further down, probably by Mango or Menard and Dempster. Now, I personally had an interesting find dating back to 2013. So as you all know, I went to Lake Forest College. I worked in the archives there, and I was a junior. So I discovered in our college newspaper, which they called the Stenter even to this day, that there was this restaurant called The Campus in a 1941 article for an ad in their paper, as you can see here. They had Chick Evans perform, who I wish I knew more about. But they were very happy that I discovered this. at Lake Forest College, the Morton Grove Historical Society, according to this quote here. And then I did find a matchbook, by the way, online. That's just a picture of it from an article from the Morton Grove Niles Patch. And you can look that up at your leisure online. And then I know that's a little hard to see, but we also had the lighthouse, and that was on the southeast corner of Dempster and Waukegan. Um, and I know that's a little difficult to see, but you have Evanston here. I'm sorry, southwest corner. You have Evanston on the east, Des Plaines here. And then you have Milwaukee and Waukegan further north, and then the city of Chicago further south. So you know how to get there just by looking at that graphic. Got just a little more here to show you. So again, this is the Doughboy, which I explained earlier on tonight. This is a picture of all those people from the Women's War Working Circle. I recommend you go there on your tour when the weather gets warmer or on a walk. There it is when we had a small snowfall in 2017, just before the restoration. The museum, excuse me, the Morton Grove Library in 1952, right there. So, and then it got remodeled, it expanded in 1980, just a brief rundown. They then updated it about 4 years ago, and now it's undergoing another renovation of the children's area in the basement as we speak. So that will be closed for several months as they're doing that. And then this is the Morton Grove Village Hall, and this was actually the original schoolhouse. I know you can't tell today, but this is the same building here, and there are boys playing baseball. It was once District 2 back in 1897, and possibly even, oh yeah, dating back to 1860, it was District 2 up to 1897. My apologies there. And it was designated the Village Hall in 1978. They had moved from their location in Cali to here on Capulina. And baseball, as you can tell, is kind of a big deal in Morton Grove, as I mentioned earlier about the baseball diamond further west in town. Moving on here, this is the what I told you about, the Nickelodeon. There's not much left today. Just it doesn't look like much of anything today. It looks like a garage to me. But it does date to the early 1900s, and there were curtain fragments and other things that were left behind. Unfortunately, I don't have any photos to show you of that. But that's on Capulina off of Ferris behind the old Kohler building that I mentioned prior. And then that's the former Engel family homestead from 1889 on Shermer. Unfortunately, folks, this is up for sale as a demolition. I know, not what I would want for this home, but that's what the family wants. They want to sell it to a developer. And I believe it sits on about 1 to 2 acres of land, and it's probably the last land that hasn't been developed in Morton Grove that outside the forest reserves. Here's today's shot of the bank, the former bank, and of the Studebaker dealer that was here. I believe they also sold, I think at one other time they may have sold Dodges here in the 20s. From another picture that I recall seeing. Didn't have enough room to show that here on my slide. Okay, so now we're getting closer to the end. This is the historic bike map link. So if you go to mortongrove.weebly, we have a map for the current map that we had from 2015. That will be updated at some point in the future per the Morton Grove Historical Society board. You may download it or even get a copy from the web, or check the village's to check out the village's historic buildings by bike, walking, or driving. You don't have to necessarily bike. I know not all of you are probably fans of doing that. And I'd wait till the snow melts to do that. All right, so I do highly encourage you to join either the Morton Grove Historical Society, the Norwood Park Historical Society, or both. And then you'll find us on Facebook. We're both on there. We're trying to partner together. We're part of the NEO organization, which I mentioned earlier, the Northeastern Illinois Historical League. So we're trying to maybe work together more in 2021, and then hopefully into next year when the pandemic subsides. Just a quick bibliography of everything, just of my sources. Now I'm going to open the questions here.
So Harris, thanks for this great presentation.
You're welcome.
It invokes memories of my wife and I riding up the North Branch Trail to Dempster and taking a detour into Morton Grove to explore it. And we always enjoyed that. So this gives us a little more insight into that. Before we get into questions, I want to remind everybody that the presentation will be on the members only site of our website. And if you're on Facebook or YouTube, I can watch the questions, but otherwise, please unmute yourself and ask away, because I muted everybody.
Oh, before we do that, Art, would you like me to switch to video and stop the screen share?
Sure.
Okay. Give me one moment, and then we could open it up to questions.
You might want to go to gallery view at this point to see everybody.
Hi, everyone.
So I'm going to gallery view to see everybody.
Yep, I'm in gallery view as well. Hey, Susan.
So we have 12 participants, but maybe not everybody's on video. So please unmute yourself and ask any questions you like.
Harris, how long would it take to ride the whole route if you started,
Sure.
You didn't ride too fast, but just leisurely ride?
Okay, let's see. A leisurely ride, I've done it before, but I've done it in reverse order and not in order either. So let's say if it's very leisurely, how about an hour? How about hour and a half to 2 hours?
Okay.
I would say that'd be the best way to go.
Okay.
It's just an estimate.
Okay, Harris, I have a question.
Yes.
Hi. Okay, I saw the program that spoke of about Chick Evans and his orchestra.
Yeah.
So, all right, I know about Chick Evans, the golfer, and the Chick
Right.
Evans scholarship. And is this the same Chick Evans, or is it a different Chick Evans?
Okay. So so this is going back to 2013.
Mhm.
I talked to Mary Bush at the time. I don't know if you met her from the NEO organization.
Maybe.
Possibly. But she did not know too much about this person, to be honest, because we know about the golfer, as you said.
Mhm. Right.
But we don't know, we don't know if there was also a musician out there with the same name or screen name that went by that. So I wish I could answer that for you, but it definitely a research project for us in the future.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Let's see. I'm looking in the chat. I don't see any questions. I answered Sue Bragg's.
Yeah, we did get a thank you from Amara, who's off on vacation. I apologize, I couldn't play the pre-recorded material that Amara had prepared because of echoing that I can't quite yet figure out why it occurred. But if there's no more questions, just a reminder that this will be posted on our members only page. Anybody else have any questions for Harris? Well, it's very interesting to hear about our neighbor to the north, and it's rich history, very, very comparable to Norwood Park.
Thanks, Harris.
Indeed. You're welcome. Happy to do this.
Yeah, thanks, Harris. Till next time.
Yes, indeed.
Norwood Park Historical Society is signing off.
Okay.
Bye.
Oh, hi, Carmen.
Hey, Harris, thank you. Thanks.
You're welcome. Did you have a question?
No, I was just going to thank you.
Oh, okay.
I thought you did, the slides were fantastic.
Oh, yeah.
It
You're
must have
welcome.
taken hours. I hope they'll be available as a reference somewhere.
Yeah, they should be. As Art stated, our vice president, they'll be up on the member page, and then there should be a pre-recording somewhere on Facebook and YouTube. And then I'll post it on, for those in Morton Grove, I'll post it on the Morton Grove Historical Society page as well. I'm their admin, so I'll post it on there and on their website, mortongrove.weebly.com.
Okay.
Yep.
Thanks a lot.
You're welcome.
Good night.
Good night.